Hi, everyone. And yeah, every time I see when I started doing work with people with persistent pain, it makes me feel a little old, but I like being called experienced. I'm going to own that and I can enjoy that. So I am just going to take over the screen. All right. So hopefully you can all see my screen. And one of the things that I have probably transitioned to in my work is moving from working as much with clients directly and moved more into working with staff. So I think this is really timely and also given our audience. So what we're hearing on the street these days, there is so much talk during the pandemic around compassion fatigue. So talking about that emotional and physical erosion that takes place when you can't refuel or regenerate, vicarious trauma, which is that shift you have in your worldview when you're helping professionals, when they work with individuals who have experienced trauma, and burnout, that physical and emotional exhaustion when there's low job satisfaction and overwhelmed by their work. And I think weekends like this are fantastic because they do just that. They refuel and regenerate. But one of the things that we often don't talk about, and I know Rob Tanga and I talk about this a lot, that people don't often talk about the ways to combat these things or being able to treat trauma. So I want to bring up another concept. Compassion satisfaction. So this is the notion that there are positive feelings about helping others, finding meaning in one's efforts, and experiencing positive collegial support. This is huge. And what a great intro into this when we've been talking about this with Dr. Neff today, as well as others, talking about that piece that compassion can be energizing. And what they've recognized is that this can really impact our quality of life, and specifically our professional quality of life. And when they've looked at compassion satisfaction, it can actually combat things that we view as causing burnout. So workload, the population, the environment that we're working in, being short-staffed, all of those things, we can combat that by using something like compassion satisfaction. So the trick is, do we still have it in each other? So I'm going to talk a lot about acceptance and commitment therapy. And in terms of pain, there's a ton of research behind it. And just as we talked about self-compassion, it's cost effective. It reduces healthcare utilization, which reduces the burden on society, because we've talked about the cost of persistent pain in terms of presenteeism, absenteeism, and just overall healthcare utilization. It looks at emotional well-being and function instead of just focusing on, are we moving the symptoms? We notice that with acceptance and commitment therapy, we can shift scores on pain acceptance, engaging in positive actions, catastrophizing, fear avoidance behaviors, and we can increase psychological flexibility. Acceptance and commitment therapy can actually be used across demographics, and it's not dependent on socioeconomic status. And it's really powerful with those who have higher rates of disability, longer duration of pain. It works with older populations as well, previously treatment failures, and neuropathic pain. And what we also know, and we talked about this in terms of the self-compassion as well, is that it actually has changes in our neuroplasticity, and it changes how we process pain. So we know all this is true. So the concepts around acceptance and commitment therapy, and I'm going to go through these really fast because we've been talking about them throughout the day and throughout the weekend. So acceptance is embracing what's causing our suffering. And by accepting it and leaning into it, we can actually own it and then potentially modify it, and it becomes less daunting. And then diffusion is that piece around getting disconnected from wearing our thoughts to being able to hold our thoughts. And one of the really big strategies that I love about this is, instead of using the word but, we use the word and. So instead of saying, I want to be giving best patient care, but I don't have the time to spend with my patients, it's, I want to be doing the best patient care and I don't have enough time. So when you hold those two together, you can actually shift away from it, negating what you want to do and being stuck in this negative situation, to being able to go into that psychological flexibility. Mindfulness, and I'm going to highlight this one in terms of the definition of mindfulness. It's paying attention on purpose to the present moment without judgment. And I really want to highlight that. That's around that compassion and being able to say that to each other and to ourselves, not judging. Selfless context is that instead of thinking you are your thoughts, it's that you're having a thought. So it gives you a way to be safe and experience the thoughts that we're having and the emotions we're having, but we're not doing it like it's taking over us, but we can watch and think about ourselves having that experience. And then values are the qualities that are not tangible, but can be experienced moment to moment. And I always say they are the things we'll never finish achieving. So we talked about, Dr. Neff talked about this, that it's a journey, it's a process. It isn't something that you can just achieve. So if you're talking about being a good coworker or a good parent or a good friend, it's not like you're like, yep, checked that box, I'm a good friend, now I can stop trying. It's those things that you're never going to finish. You're never going to finish being a good friend. You're always going to find new ways. And then the commitment to action. So committed action is looking at experiences as interesting and opportunities for learning. And when you look at everyone that's attending this weekend, we really look at everything like it's an experiment. We don't look at it like it's good or bad, because even the negative experiences we have that make us really uncomfortable, that maybe they wound us a little bit, those are things that we can still end up using and take it as opportunities to learn. And we know this, that in science experiments, you know, they do have a hypothesis, but you don't have necessarily an expected outcome. You take the data and then you figure out what the conclusions are from it. So commitment to action is just that. It's not that you have to set a goal and meet it. It's that you commit to an action and then afterwards you look at it. So let's turn the tables and talk about ourselves. Let's talk about ourselves as healthcare practitioners. And we know that if we're going to be effective in using these strategies with our clients, and that notion that you don't even need to say it out loud, you can actually, if you believe it, it gets translated and we're communicating it to our clients, even if we're not verbalizing it. So if you are psychologically flexible, if you are practicing the strategies that you're trying to instill, if you are compassionate, if you are open and express some vulnerability, if you have a shared point of view, if you can find those commonalities with the people that you work with, if you have some amount of flexibility, appropriate self-disclosure, and ultimately open to challenging the content. So as we talked about, maybe letting go of being liked and really having really genuine conversations, even if they're challenging. And I really love this quote because it really reflects on that, you know, being in a negative situation and that not becoming the determinant. You don't drown by falling in water. You drown by staying there. So during the wine and cheese, we had some conversations around this, and this is the piece around acceptance and commitment therapy that I'm going to invite you guys to think of on your own. So when you think about why you went into this work, why did you go into being a physician or an occupational therapist or a kinesiologist, physiotherapist? Why did you go into this? And the things that you identify are probably what you can consider part of your values. And we know a lot of it ends up being about that relationship and wanting to help and wanting that compassion. It's also about working as part of a team. We've talked a lot about interdisciplinary teams, but even in your family unit or with your social network, it's that relationship with each other and wanting to take care of each other and support each other. And if you think about a client or an experience related to work that was incredibly, you're so proud of it, it was so positive, what are the things that made it so positive? What are the things that you're so proud of? So that's the one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is what are the things that we find keep us from being able to be that every day when we show up to work? What is stopping us from being able to show up living those values every day? Is it that we work with a challenging population? Is it the organizational structure that we work in? Is it the other stuff that's going on in our life? Is it frustration with our coworkers or the staffing? Is it ourselves? Are we not in a good space? And once you identify those two spectrums, the values that you hold, and then the things that really cause us to struggle, where are you falling on that spectrum? Are you going and showing up every day, feeling like when you go to work, you are getting your values met and that you're behaving in a way and committing to actions? Or is it you're falling into that suffering and falling into those things that are keeping you from finding that value in the work that you do? And knowing that wherever you fall on that spectrum, it is not finite. It is not where you need to be tomorrow or the next day. And also that piece around not judging and that awareness is that by saying, you know what, maybe I am showing up at work every day and I'm mad about the situation. I'm tired of it and I'm exhausted and my coworkers are pissing me off and I'm just angry and grumpy. You can absolutely become aware of that and not judge it, but recognizing what can I maybe do to shift myself along that spectrum so that I'm closer to my values. So a couple of years ago, actually, at one of the other PSA conferences, back when it was in person, there was a group talking about acceptance commitment therapy and working with a diabetes team in Toronto. And they were talking about how the clinicians would all get together and they would talk about best practice and they would talk about all the things they want to do and how they want to change. And then they knew that lifestyle management was one of the biggest keys in terms of getting patient quality of life improved. And then they would talk about it and they would cheer each other on. And then they would go into the office with the patient and end up writing a prescription, even though they know that's not necessarily the best thing. And they said, why do you think that is? Like, what is that piece that even though you know, and you've learned all these great things and you know what the research says and you know best practice, and yet you go into this interaction and maybe you're not espousing that, you're maybe going in a different direction. And some of the stuff that they were sharing was, I'm just tired of repeating myself. I feel like nobody's listening. I don't think they're going to want to change. They're getting upset with me. I don't want them to not like me. And those are all very, very real, but we need to become aware of them. And by being open and accepting that these things can live together, and then recognizing it, and once we're aware of it, then we can make a choice about making little decisions throughout our day that can shift us back towards our values and hopefully back to that compassion satisfaction that makes us realize why we show up at work every day. So, are you guys living your values at work? So now I'm going to ask you to do a different exercise. I want you to think about one of the most challenging events that has occurred either at work, and if it's not relevant to talk about it in a work setting, in your life. It might be a challenging patient. It might be a challenging team you've worked on. But think about one of the most challenging people, places, events that you've worked with. Most people can usually come up with that one pretty quick. And ask yourself, this is that piece around, it's all data. What were your frustrations in that situation? What were your emotions in that situation? What were your thoughts? Were you avoiding anything in that situation? Were you avoiding discomfort? Were you avoiding someone that you didn't want to necessarily interact with? What was in your control in that situation? What were you able to say that I can't control this? And did that make you feel hopeless? And thinking about these not as judgments, but as challenges and as data. And when you think about those clients, because we love talking about the positive outcomes. We love talking about the clients who do well. We love talking about wonderful situations that turned out and had really great endings. Let's spend some time thinking about some of the challenges And there's a lot of them these days. And when you think about that event, what could you learn? What could you learn about yourself? What could you learn about the interaction you had? What could you learn about your client or your coworkers or your friends? What could you learn from that experience instead of just going, oof, I can't wait for it to be over? And when we are able to look at those challenges as things that can teach us as much as the ones that are really positive, we can actually start to realize, where could I have done something small, something just a little bit different, so that maybe it would have been a little less challenging, or maybe there's a way I still could have met my values. And during our wine and cheese, one of the people who attended was Raj Bardwaj, and he mentioned, when asked, how do you show up when it's during a pandemic and it's been so long and so exhausting and so taxing? And he said, and I'm paraphrasing, that he's showing up to do his best work and to take care of people, but also that he knows everyone else that he works with is showing up to care for people as well, so that you have that sense of yourself living your values, but also that sense of community and feeling like you're supporting each other and that you're making a difference. So what's that one thing? So I'm going to invite you to engage in that experiment and learning everything that we've learned, from incredible new strategies and science to the self-compassion, the awareness of trauma and doing a complete history, and being able to incorporate the whole person and ultimately letting people feel heard and believed. I would invite you to do an experiment. What's one committed action that you could do tomorrow that would have you moving a little more towards those values and a little more to becoming that person you were when you went into this? And hopefully getting a little more of that compassion satisfaction. I want to thank you for your vulnerability and for being open, not only to this talk, but for the entire weekend.